What a perfect day to make some peanut butter cheesecake macarons. This might be the best spooky season macaron to make, and I also think you should make it the rest of the year as well because it's so freaking delicious. I'm starting off by making a tan shell for my French meringue macarons. I really like to use the French meringue for small batches of macarons in my kitchen. And then I'm adding some powdered gel food colorants, which I really like to add into the egg whites to make sure that the color really develops. There aren't little flecks of color in my final batter. I'm not trying to make this a tie-dye shell or anything. When I am making anything that is like a peanut color or a baked item color, I really like to mix brown and yellow, in this case true brown and autumn gold, to create that shade of tan, which I think is just perfect for this peanut butter cheesecake. As you see, I got to a really nice stiff peak with my meringue, and then I'm incorporating all my dry ingredients with my mixer. Yes, you can add your dry ingredients and macaronage in your mixer. I often show this by hand because I do think it's best for beginners to learn by hand so you really understand what your macaron batter feels like at every single point in the process. But once you feel comfortable with that, you absolutely can do this in your mixer, especially if you start making larger and larger batches. That's really useful. If you are starting out your macaron journey and want a lot more information, tips, techniques, recipes, all that for macaron shells specifically, and really basic macarons, I recommend checking out not only my macaron shell recipes on my website, macaronsbymaddiebrame.com, but also my Introduction to Macarons course that really gets into all the different types of macaron shells that you can make and adjustments to them. Once I finish adding my dry ingredients and finish that macaronage, and then I'll just take a look really quickly just by hand at the very end, I'll transfer this macaron batter into a piping bag and get to piping my macaron shells. I generally like to pipe my macaron shells on a Teflon baking sheet, and I use a template. The template is a free download on my website. Again, that's macaronsbymaddiebrame.com. You can always find it. It will always be free. I'm using a Teflon baking sheet both because I think it bakes really nicely and I really like it for all of my photos that I do for my ebooks and things. You can of course use a silicone baking mat or parchment paper as you prefer. I am just piping regular circle macaron shells here. The reason I'm not doing anything crazy with these shells, I'm just going to pipe these shells, tap the tray, and then that's all, rest and bake them, because I want to have a ton of filling. And then I'm also going to dip these shells in chocolate after the macarons are filled. So I really wanted these shells to be quite plain, but don't worry, they're not going to be boring. They are going to be very exciting looking macarons. So if you aren't going to dip your macarons in chocolate after the bake, you might want to consider adding something like chopped peanuts or something like that to the shells. All right, here we are, the star of the show. I love cheesecake buttercream, and truly, if you didn't know this already, the key to a cheesecake buttercream is to use an ermine style buttercream as the base. So I've got my flour and peanut butter powder going into a saucepan. I'm going to turn that onto medium heat and stir it occasionally until it is hot, for about 5 minutes. This is going to help us heat treat the flour to make sure it's completely safe to eat, as the buttercream is obviously not going to be baked. The reason we're using flour here in an ermine style buttercream is because that is going to give the cream cheese a ton of stability without adding too much sweetness. So now that my flour is hot, it's really fragrant. You can smell that peanut as well. Now I'm adding in my sugar, but don't worry, the amount of sugar that is in this recipe is going to make a mildly sweet buttercream as opposed to most cream cheese buttercream that are more like an American style that are way, way, way too sweet, in my opinion. Now we have a little bit of cream. It's important to have a little bit of liquid most of the time when you're working with cream cheese. But here, the cream cheese is acting like a cream replacement, so we don't actually have a lot of liquid. It doesn't look like we have a lot of liquid, but because the cream cheese will melt down as it heats up, that is acting like our cream in this recipe, and that is going to help us get a ton of cream cheese flavor without having this moist, soggy mess on our hands. So the cream cheese is acting like cream. A lot of people think it acts like butter. No, it acts like cream. And then the flour is going to help thicken this and create a lot of stability. So I am just going to whisk this all. Mostly I'm looking for in this beginning stage to make sure that cream cheese can melt, get any lumps out of there, and then I'm just going to continue whisking this on like a medium-low heat until it really thickens up and takes on the appearance and texture more of a thick custard or a really thick pastry cream. And you can cook this until it fully comes to a boil, or if it already looks really, really thick, you can take it off the heat as well. Now that that peanut cream cheese mixture is done cooking, I'm going to let it cool down before I continue on with the buttercream. Otherwise, the heat from that cream cheese mixture would just melt the butter and you would have a soupy disaster on your hands. So once the cream cheese mixture has cooled to just above room temperature, I want it to be warm but not hot. I put the butter into the bowl of my mixer and I'm just going to whip that up for several minutes. I want this to look light and fluffy, and I want it to basically look like it already is a buttercream before I go adding in a little bit of that peanut cream cheese mixture, a little bit at a time. I will continue adding some of that, mixing, adding more, mixing until everything is completely incorporated. Now, some key things to remember with the buttercream. 1, make sure you have cooled off that ermine mixture in the beginning. If you add it in right away, again, your butter will melt. It will be a disaster. Number 2, make sure your butter is light and fluffy before you begin adding in the cream cheese mixture. Then, number 3, after everything is incorporated, crank up the speed of your mixer with your whisk attachment and let this whip for several minutes to get as light and fluffy as possible. Then switch over to your paddle attachment and mix on a really, really low speed for several more minutes to take out any large air bubbles and create a really creamy buttercream. So those are the 4 important things to remember as you make this or honestly any other buttercream. As soon as the buttercream is finished, we're ready to fill our macaron shells. So I have these tan macaron shells that I made before. Again, I'm obsessed with this color. I think it is perfect for anything with peanuts or something like a baked item. So the cheesecake element as well. It just seems so perfect for this. And then I chose a really big French star tip. I wanted this to just be so decadent and beautiful. So I chose this huge French star tip and I'm piping this huge rosette into the center of all of my macarons. You could, of course, use a more regular circle piping tip or a star tip or no tip, whatever you want, however much buttercream you want to add, go for that. But I promise you, this buttercream is one that you'll want to just eat with a spoon or straight out of the piping bag. So truly, the more the merrier here. As soon as I have those macaron shells filled with the buttercream, I'll sandwich them up and then get them into the refrigerator. Here's the thing though, instead of then transferring them into an airtight container to store, I just want these macarons to set enough and cool enough for the butter in the buttercream to firm up so that the macarons are quite stable. Right now, they're really soft, right? That buttercream is really malleable, really flexible. If I try to dip them, The buttercream might melt when it touches the chocolate. It might ooze out. So I want that to set up, but I also don't want the macarons to mature. So after about 30 minutes, I am going to work on my chocolate glaze. I used a mix of milk and dark chocolate, and then after that's melted, I'm going to add in some neutral oil. I like to use grapeseed oil, and then that is the really easy chocolate dip I'm going to use. So again, when you get to this stage, you want to be dipping macarons that have set up. They are cold to the touch. The buttercream is completely firm, but the macarons are not yet mature. So I recommend between 30 minutes and at most, I would say 6 hours after filling and sandwiching the macarons for the best results. Once your chocolate is melted, the oil is incorporated, it's time to dip the macarons. Now, you can dip your macarons however you want. I'm going to go in on the side. I think that looks so nice. It's so fun to do. It's really easy, but you can dip the top, you can dip a small portion, you can dip the entire thing, you can drizzle the chocolate on the top. Truly, whatever you want, whatever style suits you and your kitchen and these macarons the best is great. I find that dipping about 1/3 up to 1/2 of these macarons is the perfect amount of chocolate because I really want this to be like a peanut butter cup, but in a cheesecake form. So I do want a pretty decent amount of chocolate. Yes, the cheesecake and the peanut butter in the filling is super important, but the chocolate I feel is super important as well. So while that chocolate is still wet, I am going to add some flaky sea salt just for balance. I love adding sea salt into my desserts. That is optional if you don't want to do that. That's okay. You can leave that off. If you want to add some chopped peanuts instead, go for it. Again, this is the point in the macaron when you can do whatever you want. After dipping all of the macarons in the chocolate and sprinkling on that sea salt, I'm just going to leave them at room temperature for I would say about 20 to 30 minutes to just let the chocolate completely set up before I transfer them back into the refrigerator, and then I can pack them into an airtight storage container to either refrigerate for about a week or to freeze for up to about 2 months. I don't have any problem putting these macarons into my freezer. They mature like normal, they freeze like normal, they thaw like normal. And honestly, they are some of the most delicious macarons I think I've made this year. I'm obsessed with it. I've loved sharing this recipe with folks already, and I hope you love it too. If you give it a try, make sure to tag me over on Instagram at Maddie Brame. I'd love to see your end results and hear what you think. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next video. Until then, have a wonderful rest of your day. Bye.